I'm ready.
Okay. Okay. Good morning. It's Graham from Tri Coaching Partnership. I'd like to introduce my friend Christian Van Nieuwerburgh. Christian, tell me a little bit about yourself. Just where
Thank
you
you so much,
started.
Graham. Thank you so much. I'm a big fan of executive coaching. I moved to the UK back in 1997. So I've been here. I can't do the maths, but I've been here quite a long time. And during the time, I grew up in Lebanon, Beirut, Lebanon,
Okay.
and I studied English literature at university. And I first came to England to do a master's in or a postgraduate degree in Elizabethan literature. So that was my first visit. So I went to Stratford-on-Avon. I worked while I was doing my PhD, I worked in England, and I started doing some marketing work for the Royal Shakespeare Company. So there was a real connection there between what I was passionate about, which was Shakespeare, and my professional side. Then I went on to work in education in the UK, and my passion is still there. My heart is still in education, and now I work at a university, and I also work for an organization based out in Australia. My life right now is very different to what it normally is because of what's going on around us. But just before the COVID pandemic, it was a pretty hectic life, actually. A lot of traveling, delivering keynote sessions, conference presentations, training, really all over the world. And, that was my dream. That's beyond my dream, if you like, Graham, because when I first came to England, my dream was living in England. I would have been happy to do anything in England. But then now, but it's interesting taking a step back now. Maybe it was a little bit too hectic, but that's it in a nutshell for so far.
Okay. So I've got two questions. The first question, your name doesn't sound Lebanese.
That's right. So I've got quite an international background. I would say maybe diverse background. So my mother's Japanese, and she's 94 this year, and living in England with me or nearby. My father was Belgian, a Belgian citizen. He passed away, but that's where I get my name and my nationality from. So my nationality is Belgian. But my father used to work for the Belgian embassy. He was stationed in Beirut at the time I was born. So I was born there. But you can see it's kind of diverse.
Yeah, very diverse. Yeah, lovely. A lovely, what a great cultural mix.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's probably one of the reasons I got interested in coaching, Graham, is just this, my kind of passion for people communicating well with one another. And, those kind of open conversations was really important for me, a way of how do we bring people closer together? Because having these different backgrounds, gradually I've been noticing more of division between people. And I thought coaching is definitely a way of bringing people together, I was hoping.
Okay. So, look, you were my tutor at the University of East London, along with Dr. Jonathan Passmore. How did your coaching journey begin to get there? I mean, you don't just rock up and go, right, I'm lecturing in the University of East London.
That's great. Well, I do remember that cohort, Graham, that you were in. It was probably one of my favorites. I remember that group fondly. Yeah, so I guess I've been with the University of East London now for 8 years. And you don't rock up. And I'm very grateful to people like Jonathan Passmore, who opened doors for me, who made things possible. But it's a wonderful example of serendipity, I guess. So about 8 years ago, whenever it was, there was a global financial crisis going on. my local government job that I had was a bit under threat. I had already been working in the education sector. I'd become a coach myself to work across local government, but I was particularly interested in how coaching can be used in schools. So through my professional role in local government, I was delivering some coach training to the education sector. I went to a coaching conference because I was still learning coaching. I was, just trying to gather as much information as I could. And there was Professor Jonathan Passmore, already by that time a leading figure in the field. And I'm just sitting here in the audience thinking, well, I don't really have much to add here. But it took a lot of courage, Graham, for me to go up to Jonathan at the end of his presentation, because I thought it was great. I kind of meekly went up and I said, Jonathan, just wanted to let you know, excellent presentation. I really like the way you present things. And you know how, Jonathan's actually a lovely person. But the natural response is, oh, tell me a bit about yourself, he asked me. And I said, well, I do a bit of coaching in the education sector. I work with schools. And then Jonathan said, well, we're thinking of setting up a module on coaching and education at the University of East London. What do you think? And at that time, I was, in the process of getting made redundant where I was working. So I was thinking, why not? Went down to London, and then Jonathan offered me a job. There's a link back to what I said earlier, though. By that time, I had my PhD in Elizabethan drama, so something completely unrelated. But I think that helped in getting my university role, because at least I had a PhD and I had experience in coaching. And with Jonathan's mentorship and support, I started teaching on that program. And then when Jonathan moved on to do other things, I took over the management of that program. And that my time with the University of East London has really been transformational for me. But that thing about you don't just rock up is right, because I had conversations with Jonathan and other coaches. I've had lots of good coaches, and they all said to me, you need to specialize in something. You really need to become a specialist in one thing. And the natural thing for me was coaching and education. I thought, well, that's where my heart is. I really want to make a difference in that sector. So from then on, I just thought, this is my area, coaching and education. And I wrote a book back in 2012 called Coaching and Education.
Okay.
And probably nowadays people would see me as one of the leading academics within that field. It's a small field, but that's one way of being established, I think.
No, absolutely. I mean, look, I'm going to ask you, because I'm a fan of your Introduction to Coaching Skills, a practical guide, the book. I'm sure you've got a copy there you can just show us just for a moment.
I've got lots of copies, but here it is.
Yeah, no.
Coaching skills.
What led you to write that book?
Well, this is my favorite question, Graham. Thank you for that question. It came in a funny way around, I think, because I started teaching coaching before I wrote the book. And I guess I was just thinking, I really want a companion. I was thinking, what would be the most helpful thing I could write for people who are learning to become coaches? And what I used was the questions I get asked all the time. I thought, what's the order of how we can learn these things? How can I keep it simple? Because I also am thinking of non-native English speakers, and I've tried to make it as accessible as possible language-wise, but it's become a bestseller for the publisher, Sage. And I think one of the reasons for that is we added video clips of live coaching sessions. So, because again, Graham, that's what our students were saying to us is, oh, I get the concept, but what does that look like? People wanted to see it happening. So it's got 80 clips, and I'm just working on the 3rd edition of that now. So it's gone through 3 editions, and it's being used as a coaching textbook in the US. It's being used in Australia, here in the UK, in South Africa. So I'm very proud of the book, but even more excited that people are using it in the way that it was intended.
Yeah, I mean, what I like about the book, Christian, is it's spoken in what I call like easy language. It's
Yeah,
not, there's not, and my audience, psychological mumble jumbo, they all go, oh no, thanks to that, and they're walking away. Whereas if you can talk to them in easy, understandable language, just translate it and bring it down, and just normal conversations. And that's why I'm such a fan of this book. I mean, and I've always promoted it
thanks,
because
Graham.
I just think it's a great introduction to coaching. You know,
Wonderful.
look, I've got to let you, even though I know the next book up is a little bit advanced, but for there's other people who will watch this a bit like me and want something from you a bit more advanced. So just tell us, you've got an advanced book now.
I do.
No,
And
look,
look, this isn't, I'm not just trying to promote my books, I promise. And
yeah,
please don't buy them unless they ring a bell. But the advanced coaching, Graham, you're right. So I wrote that Introduction to Coaching Skills book, and there's a huge global business in training people to be coaches, which is a good thing. But I was thinking there's not that much out there for people who are already trained, who are experienced coaches. And they don't need to go onto a course, they don't need to go and to get a university degree if they're already experienced. And so what I did, Sage, the publisher, asked me to write the follow-up book. They said, well, that book's doing really well, can you write the follow-up? And they said, could you write a book called Advanced Coaching Skills? Well, I couldn't think what the new skills were.
yeah,
So I actually got in touch. The co-author is David Love. He's my teacher. He's the one who taught me coaching. And I said to David, could we write the book together? And so it's ended up, what we started with is we spoke to a lot of experienced coaches. Again, we videoed advanced practitioners. And then based on what we saw, we put together what we noticed as different about experienced coaches compared to novice coaches. So the book essentially encourages you to become a reflective practitioner and talks about 9 tensions that seem to pop up in coaching practice. But it was a great process writing that book, Graham. And if somebody's a very experienced coach, I'd say 3 to 5 years of experience coaching, this book would probably be relevant.
okay, excellent. I want to come back to sort of my industry. Christian, if you were a driving instructor, how do you think a coaching approach would work? So I've now made you a qualified driving instructor.
Thank you. Look, this gives me a great opportunity, Graham, to say how much I appreciate the work of driving instructors. And I learned more about the driving industry through my interaction with you and your colleagues like Susan McCormack. And I remember one time we invited Sir John Whitmore to come and speak at a conference. Yeah. So I'm very grateful to driving instructors, and I'll tell you why. I really think that driving instructors do more. The best driving instructors do much more than teach people how to drive. There's so much there about being responsible, being reflective, learning, building confidence. And so I really value the industry. And, your driving instructors teach lifelong skills. And driving instructors get to teach people who sometimes haven't benefited from the traditional education system. I think that's the great thing. Many people want to learn how to drive. So there's that motivation already there, even if the traditional system hasn't been good for them, if you know what I mean. So I think the best driving instructors are really good at building relationships, building trust, creating a sense of safety. So, but what a great question. Look, I don't know because I'm not a driving instructor, so I wouldn't venture to say, but I've seen excellent driving instructors. My wife had a wonderful driving instructor when she came to England. So did I. And so I think for me, the ideal driving instructor of course I'm going to say this, but balances a coaching approach with a deep knowledge. So they are expert as well in driving, but they don't come in as didactic, they come in as partners. And so the coaching, the driving instructor approach that I would advocate, I know that you at Tri Coaching Partnership advocate it as well. So I would probably call it a coaching approach to driving instruction. But having said that, we have to acknowledge, and I think we've had these conversations before, Graham, but it's a particularly challenging type of coaching because it's almost as if the coaching room has got wheels on it, and you are in a safety critical environment. So safety has to come first. And so I guess driving instructors have to be able to balance the coaching approach in a way that's appropriate at the right time, that builds confidence, that empowers the learner, and at the same time, be aware of the safety in the relationship, but the safety, in the world as well.
Absolutely. Christian, it's a bit like I just borrowed your mind and just gave it to, tried to give it to the driving instructor industry, because that's exactly what we try to do. The safety critical element is so important, which means that coaching on the move is not really practical, but coaching at the side of the road definitely is. And that's what we advocate, really, because it's hard to coach on the move because you're distracting people from the task.
Yeah, I love that. I think, and again, for me, I don't know much about the driving industry, obviously, but for me, when I talk about what coaching is, I do say that it's important. The coach's role is to create a sense of safety. And what you just suggested does exactly that, because you're making it clear to the learner, let's pull over. I can give you my full attention. You can be fully in the moment. And then there's the safety of, now let's have a conversation, which is really putting you, again, what a great analogy, in the driving seat. We often, in my advanced coaching practice book, I do use the analogy of learning how to drive in relation to learning how to become a coach. So very interesting.
Okay. I want to ask you, there's a number of different coaching skills. If someone wants to be a coach, what would you advise as the number one coaching skill that new coaches should develop?
Yeah, well, it really depends on the audience. If we're talking to driving instructors, I would say the skill to develop is how to set one's expertise aside. I think that's a really challenging skill. What I mean by that is, we might have expertise about how to do something in particular. It's not, I don't mean to withhold it, because that's why you're there. If you're the driving instructor, you're there because you're expert in your craft. But what I mean by set it to one side is hold it in the background to allow the learner to come up with something, to ask questions first. So if I weren't to say setting expertise aside for a time, the other one would maybe, to simplify it, to say, ask questions first. And I know this is the kind of thing that's part and parcel of the work you deliver, but I guess it's asking, because, I think a coaching approach means you get a competent driver who is self-confident at the end. Because it's possible to get somebody to pass the test and still not be confident. And if I imagine my driving instructor, is just simply telling me everything I need to do in order to pass the test, I'd probably be quite anxious after the driving instructor is no longer with me. And, that analogy, Graham, again, a very interesting one, because I think that's a great analogy about coaching. Coaching is about, how does this coachee flourish when the other person's not there with you anymore? So it's so important for the coach to start building that independence, the autonomy, right from the beginning of the relationship, I would say.
Yeah, no, I agree. We emphasize that teaching a post-test environment, even though it's pre-test, do your teaching in a post-test environment so that they're developing those skills that they can take with them in that post-test. And of course, it's impossible to absolutely recreate it, but that's the goal, really, is for them to be able to work in a post-test environment and not do the driving test.
I love that. And you know, the practical way a driving instructor will know if they're doing it the way you're talking about is if the learner afterwards says, let's imagine you were the driving instructor, they almost imagining Graham on their shoulder, you know, as they're coming to a roundabout or something. I'd love them to think, what would Graham be saying? What would Graham be asking? And I think if we get that, then that means that the driving instruction has had that coaching approach, which is they're with them the whole time.
Yeah, I only laugh because so many of my clients have gone, do you know what, I hear you in my head all the time. I feel sorry for them. Okay, right. Christian, as someone who's an expert in positive psychology, we know many people learning that driving, through that driving experience though, suffer performance interfering thoughts. What advice would you give driving instructors to help them encourage their pupils during that learning process to deal with those negative thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's difficult for me to give advice specifically to driving instructors, but because I know the driving instructors will have their strategies already. But just in general, when we're dealing in coaching, I think one of the things is we all have those thoughts. So one, I would say the first thing is to acknowledge, to say, okay, it sounds like you've got some recurring kind of concerns about this, or I notice you're talking yourself down a little bit there. So they acknowledge. Second is to normalize, to say, look, this is normal when we learn something new. That's us as human beings. And, you know, we're learning how to do something. So that niggling self-doubt, that's normal. That's there is something helpful about the niggling self-doubt, because that's helping us to think, I want to get it right. And I'm thinking, I don't know if I'm getting it right. I keep messing it up. But that's the brain trying to say, look, make sure you get it right. I think so. Normalize. And then especially celebrate success, because the success will help to challenge those negative thoughts, to say, look, oh, you did it. You did manage it. And I guess driving instructors could hold the two things up to say, I remember you said, I'm never going to be able to, I don't know, parallel park or something. I'm not good at this. And look how well you're doing it now. So by giving them evidence of success, challenge those performance inhibiting thoughts, or there's lots of ways of talking about them. But I think the most important thing is to be compassionate and say, this is normal. This is natural human behavior to have concerns. And look, with driving instruction, people are learning something new, and it's very risky. You're putting people on the road with other road users. So it's normal that they're anxious. And then on top of that, you're giving them an exam. These are all the things that cause anxiety in people. So I think driving instructors are probably quite experienced in how to deal with that. Another thing I'll add, just as I'm thinking aloud here, is and I think driving instructors already do this, is the calmness of the driving instructor becomes really important. For the driving instructor to have that settled, confident, I know it's going to be okay attitude, which many driving instructors I know have already. That's part of it. And that comes back to that notion of acknowledging that this is an anxiety inducing kind of series of events. It becomes so important for the driving instructor or the coach to create that sense of safety. And the best tool we have, Graham, thanks to the evidence, the research into coaching, is the quality of the relationship. That's the most important thing. So I would say that probably comes first, building the relationship with the learner. And I know the best driving instructors, they know that already.
Yeah, I have a simple mantra. If you lose the rapport, you lose the learning.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so, and you know, rapport is a really challenging skill. because
Yeah.
people come in different shapes and sizes, you know, and we don't get on with everyone, you know, and it's a skill to learn. And in fact, I suppose, touching on skill, is coaching a skill you can learn or a skill you need to discover you already have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, on the point of building relationships and rapport, I agree entirely, because so that does mean the driving instructor has to be great at noticing. So the emotional intelligence piece is very important, because, like you say, people come in all shapes and sizes, and they've had a wide variety of experiences of being taught things. And if they've had a bad experience of being taught, you know, in school or somewhere else, then they'll bring that into the car with them. So they'll bring this little bit of, I don't want people to teach me things.
Yeah.
If they've had bad experiences with other people in authority, you know, so I do think it's very challenging to be a driving instructor. And that's why I have great respect and admiration for the people who do this work. This is a question, Graham, that I've had since we met, probably 8 years ago or whatever, and even before, is is coaching something you can teach or not? And I think, yes. So coaching, the skills can be taught. The conversational frameworks can be taught. There's a third element here, which I talk about in my Introduction to Coaching Skills book, which is the coaching way of being. And that's something it can't be taught. You can raise people's awareness about it. I don't think you can teach it, because it's not always the same for everyone. It's very important that coaching, the way of being, is genuine and authentic, because coming back to rapport and relationships, you can't build a relationship with someone who's not being authentic, who's not being genuine. So on the one hand, it has to be authentic and genuine, but there are some important things it needs to include to be considered a coaching approach. One is a kind of a spirit of benevolence, which is wanting good things for other people. So that needs to be built in there. But again, people show that differently. I think this attitude of caring about people, being generous, I think with praise, with information, there's lots of things that I would capture a coaching way of being. And I think that part cannot be taught. And what I mean by the differences, Graham, is it doesn't just mean being lovey-dovey and sweet and or even funny. It doesn't have to be. For some people, it can be that. For some people who don't like that side of things, they can be a bit stern. They can be serious, but show that they care about the coachee, that they're really interested. And you know, the one thing I think, because what you do as coaching driving instructors a lot is you give feedback, and I think people are more open to feedback if they believe that the person giving them the feedback has their best interest at heart. So if I believe that, if I think Graham really wants what's best for me in all of this and cares about me, then when you give me feedback, I'm open to it. But like you say, no rapport, no relationship, I'll be resisting everything you tell me. I'll be like, oh, they don't know things, or they're just trying to, you know, impose their view on me. Or so, yeah, very important. So I guess, yes, coaching can be taught. The way of being has to be developed.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting you bring up feedback, because when we're checked as driving instructors, which is about every 4 years, we have a standards check. Feedback is in 3 of the competencies, and we always promote eliciting feedback first before giving it, because we want the bigger picture before we give feedback. We want to know what they were thinking and feeling before we give the feedback. Otherwise, it tends to end up fault-based feedback, all about skill and not about the performance.
Absolutely. And for me, there's 2 parts about feedback, Graham. One is how to present feedback in a way that's digestible and implementable. So there's how you deliver it, but coming back to what we were saying earlier, Graham, the other part is creating the environment in which feedback can be accepted. And it comes back to that safety, the trust, the way of being. So I think there's those two components, because somebody could be, you know, a master in how to deliver feedback, but if the relationship isn't there, you know, they might deliver it well, but the recipient just won't be open to it. The recipient will have their defenses up and they'll be thinking, I don't really like this person. And they're not learning. And, you know, in your industry, I don't think I'm over dramatizing to say this could be a life or death thing. If somebody could learn something because of the relationship or whatever, it could be dramatic. So I think, yeah, I think the ability to build relationships is probably a core skill for driving instructors.
Cool, cool. I want you to take away, I would just come away from this line of questioning, because I want to ask you a personal question. If you could choose one person to coach you, who would it be and why? Who would you choose?
That's an interesting question. I do have some people that I get in touch with regularly, and they're people in my network that I admire. And I would probably say that's for informal coaching. So when I've got a decision to take, I've got 2 or 3 people. They tend to be professionals that I've worked with. We've got a good relationship. I often think I would like to be coached by graduates of the program that I teach on at University of East London, because you know, it's a wonderful thing to see people go through our program, and we think it's a good program. And I've avoided that in the past because certainly when people are students, it wouldn't be appropriate. But I've often thought asking a graduate of our program to coach me, I'd be really interested in that. And, you know, I don't think we should be picking people based on personality. I can think of a few people. I think, oh, they'd be interesting. It's really, you know, somebody who's going to, you know, has the way of being that I talked about. That would be my prime focus. And if you told me you can either have somebody who's got excellent skills, if I had to choose between excellent skills and the way of being, I'd pick way of being every time.
Okay. Okay, so that's, I'm interested now. I want you to get coached by someone who's come, because I'd like to find out what your insights would be into that, because that I would think that would be really insightful, really sort of like, okay, so I've been putting it now. The only thing is, I just wonder whether you could be coached if you, because of your frame would be.
Yeah, no, I'm coachable. I'm highly coachable.
Okay. Okay. Look, Christian, I just want to ask you some fun questions. I want to ask you actually about, have you got any hobbies or any interests?
Oh, yeah, I've got quite a few interests. One is Elizabethan drama. So I still go and watch plays. I love that. It's a kind of a slightly nerdy interest, but I do like it. My other interests are travel, particularly by motorcycle. So I'm an avid motorcyclist. And when I'm not doing things like that, yeah, I guess exploring new countries, new places. I just love, I love the experience of trying to understand a place. So one of my favorite things to do if I go somewhere is to go to where all the locals are and just watch what they do. So early in the morning, going down, you know, even ordering a coffee, I've noticed, or whatever the early morning drink is, it's traditional. People, there's no rule book. Nobody says you have to do X, Y, and Z. You kind of have to learn it. And I love doing that. So that's probably my favorite thing to do. I have a funny story about when I first came to England. I'd never been, before I came to England for the first time in 95, before I moved here. I'd never been to a pub, a proper pub. And every kind of dining place I'd been to before then, you sit down and somebody comes and takes your order.
Yeah.
So I got to England, walked into a pub, and my friend and I just went and sat at a table. we didn't know you had to go order at the bar. And the person behind the bar was giving us funny looks because we're just sitting there, no drinks, nothing. And after a little while, we noticed people going straight up to the person and saying, "Can I have this or that?" And we didn't know that. And there's things like that in every country. You know, people assume, oh yeah, everybody knows how to order breakfast, but yes, and I love learning about stuff like that. So I would say traveling, learning, exploring is one of my biggest hobbies.
What about sports? Any interest in any sports?
I'm not a big sports person. I do watch sports, but I'm not really into any kind of in an avid way.
Okay, all right. I just thought you might be fond of the Belgium national football team. That was all.
Yeah. So it's probably more to do with just love. I'm a great spectator, and of course, I support the Belgian national team. They're always there. I think. They're always a team of a lot of potential that just don't get there. But I'm always hopeful. I remain optimistic.
All right. So I'll just ask you a few more questions. I want to know what your first car was and what do you drive now? Now I know you're a motorcyclist, so I'll be interested.
That's right. So made a big decision earlier this year. So my first car, I bought it when I was 17 years old, and it was a 1979 Honda Civic. I still remember it. Wonderful little car. My budget was tiny when I bought a car there. I had to buy it with my own money. So the bonnet was a different color from the rest of the car. It was a shiny blue on the outside, and it had a silver bonnet. Really, broke down all the time. But it was fun. I still remember it fondly. Earlier this year, I sold my car because I've decided I just want to have a Harley.
Okay.
So now I've got a Harley Davidson Electroglide Limited. It's one of these that's got, panniers. It's for touring. So my plan is to ride to Spain this year. If things work out. I think we're all in this position at the moment of not knowing. But Graham, we had a bit of a pre-chat about this, about the current situation. And there's so many things we don't know right now. And I just thought, let me just make a decision of my own, which is right. My wife has a car, so we have a car in the household. So I thought I'll get rid of my car, buy a motorcycle. And just having something to plan for, Graham, I'm just starting to think whenever COVID calms down, whenever we can start traveling again, and I'm already looking at maps, I'm looking at the route I would take. And I think that is important for our mental health right now, because however positive we want to be, however positive we are, there's some really difficult things going on at the moment. And I think what's challenging now, Graham, is convergence of all of these. There's financial worries we have, and I know driving instructors will be facing those. There's social worries, there's health worries, there's the Black Lives Matter movement. There's, just a whole lot of things coming at us at once. And I do think one strategy for that is to limit our news consumption, because the news, of course, is going to highlight the things that aren't going well. That's how news works. That's what draws our attention even. So the reason the news channels put on those, the negative news stories is because we click on them. That's the one that we think, oh, we need to see that. We need. So I think, again, the irony there, Graham, is that during these times, we tend to focus on things that are a risk to us. So of course we're going to go there. So I'm not saying ignore the news altogether, but maybe limit our consumption of the news. But also, I think, start to plan for something that you're looking forward to, that you have some control over. I think that's going to be important too.
Okay. Christian, I'm going to ask one more question. And this question is the big question. Everyone waits for this question, and it doesn't take long. I'll move on very quickly after this. So this is your last question. How do you think I rate as an interviewer?
Well, Graham, I'm biased. I like you as a person. I think, I've really enjoyed this conversation. And Graham, you're a great interviewer, genuinely, because you know, it's been a free-flowing conversation. We've had a bit of a laugh at it. You've allowed me to kind of, I know I've gone off on tangents a little bit. You've been very understanding about that. And so, yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I think the best way to assess an interviewer is, did you enjoy the conversation? I certainly have.
Excellent. Thank you, Christian. So I'm going to finish it there. So I'm just going to say thank you, Christian, for being my interviewee today. It's been a pleasure. And if you want to say goodbye, I'll stop the recording.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christian.